She told me, "My ex and I have to travel together for work. If you have a problem, that's on you." I said, "Got it." Days later, I signed my contract in Dubai and left without a word. I'm Derek, 31 years old, and I've spent the last 3 years working as a logistics coordinator for a multinational shipping company in Chicago, the kind of steady, reliable job that doesn't make for exciting dinner conversation but pays well enough and keeps international commerce moving smoothly across 3 continents. I met Lauren at a charity fundraiser in Lincoln Park back when she was still a junior graphic designer sketching concepts in coffee shops, and I was coordinating container shipments through the port of Long Beach. We connected over shared frustration with Chicago winters and a mutual appreciation for deep dish pizza that actual Chicagoans refuse to eat, and within 6 months we'd fallen into that comfortable rhythm where you start finishing each other's grocery lists and debating whether to get a dog. She moved from freelance design work to a full-time position at a boutique advertising agency about 18 months into our relationship, and I was genuinely proud watching her grow into her creative abilities, seeing her confidence build as clients specifically requested her for projects, watching her develop that particular creative language that made her work distinctive. What I didn't anticipate was how that professional growth would fundamentally reshape what she expected from our relationship and who she believed deserved her time. The agency hired Ryan about 7 months ago as a senior creative director, and Lauren mentioned casually during dinner one night that they dated for 4 years during college. She framed it as ancient history, something that ended badly but had been processed and resolved years ago. I didn't think much of it initially because I'm not the jealous type who monitors my partner's professional relationships, and Lauren had always been transparent about her past. But the dynamic shifted almost immediately after Ryan joined her team. Suddenly her work schedule exploded into weekend brainstorming retreats and multi-day client presentations that required her entire creative team, which apparently meant Ryan co-leading every significant project. The nightly video calls we'd maintained whenever she traveled became sporadic text messages sent at 11 p.m. with vague explanations about working dinners running late. Weekend trips to Milwaukee or Indianapolis for client meetings extended to full weeks in Nashville or Austin for what she called creative intensives. I wasn't tracking her movements like some paranoid detective, but I noticed the pattern. Every major project now required extended travel time with her ex-boyfriend, and every question I asked about logistics or timelines was met with increasingly defensive responses about me not understanding creative collaboration or trusting her professional judgment. I'd been sitting on a job offer for about 4 months at that point, senior operations manager for our company's Middle East division based in Dubai. The position would triple my current responsibilities coordinating shipping operations across 7 countries, increase my salary by 55%, and position me for VP-level roles within 3 years. It was the kind of career opportunity that doesn't come around twice, the type that separates people who stay comfortable from people who actually build something significant. But I kept declining the repeated offers from my regional director because I'd convinced myself that building a life with Lauren in Chicago mattered more than professional advancement, that relationships required sacrifice and compromise, that the right partner was worth staying geographically stagnant for. Every time my director called asking if I'd reconsidered, I'd look at photos of Lauren and me at Navy Pier or remember how she'd surprised me with Cubs tickets for my birthday, and I'd send another polite email explaining that my personal circumstances made international relocation impossible right now. I told myself I was being mature and committed, choosing partnership over ambition. What I didn't realize was that I was the only person in the relationship making that choice. Lauren returned from a 9-day creative intensive in Nashville on a Thursday evening, and I picked her up from O'Hare with coffee from her favorite shop and genuine excitement to see her after the longest stretch we'd been apart in months. She was distracted during the drive home, scrolling through her phone and offering one-word responses to my questions about how the project had gone, and when I asked if Ryan had been helpful as co-lead on the sessions, she shot me a look that made it clear I'd crossed some invisible line by mentioning his name. I decided to wait until we had proper time together to discuss the Dubai opportunity. I'd been rehearsing how to frame it as something we could navigate together, maybe explore long-distance arrangements for 6 months while she looked for creative opportunities in the Middle East's growing advertising sector, or even consider it a temporary assignment that could accelerate my career trajectory before we settled permanently back in Chicago. I made reservations at our regular Greek restaurant in Greektown for Saturday night, the place where we'd celebrated her promotion and my 30th birthday, somewhere that felt significant enough for a serious conversation about our future. I brought up Dubai halfway through dinner, explaining that my regional director had called again that week and that the opportunity was substantial enough that I wanted us to seriously discuss whether it made sense for our relationship. Lauren's face changed immediately, not disappointment or concern about potential separation, but genuine anger that I was even bringing this up. "You're really trying to do this now?" she said, setting down her fork with enough force that it clattered against the plate. "Just when my career is finally gaining real momentum, just when I'm being recognized for actual talent instead of being someone's junior assistant, you want to move halfway across the world?" I tried to explain that I wasn't demanding anything, that I wanted us to explore options together, that her career mattered as much as mine and we could find creative solutions if we approached this as partners. She cut me off before I finished the sentence. "Derek, you don't get it. This isn't about finding creative solutions. This is about you trying to control my career trajectory because you're uncomfortable with my professional success." The accusation hit me like cold water because nothing I'd said remotely suggested that interpretation, but she was already building momentum, her voice rising slightly as other diners glanced toward our table. "I've worked for 6 years to get to this position. 6 years of pitching concepts that men took credit for, of being told my ideas were too soft or too feminine, of proving myself in every single meeting. And now that I finally have creative authority and projects that matter, you want me to what? Follow you to Dubai and start over in some market where I have zero connections and zero credibility?" I pointed out that I'd been supportive of every career move she'd made, that I'd never asked her to sacrifice professional opportunities, that I was simply asking us to have an honest conversation about whether a temporary international assignment could work for both of us. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Temporary? These things are never temporary, Derek. You take the Dubai job, you're there for 3 years minimum, probably 5. And what am I supposed to do? Put my entire career on hold because you got offered more money?" I asked if she'd considered that I'd been putting significant career advancement on hold for 4 months specifically because I valued our relationship, that I declined this position 3 times already because I thought we were building something together that mattered more than individual ambition. Her expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, not quite contempt, but close. "Nobody asked you to do that. That was your choice. Your decision to stay comfortable instead of taking risks. Don't put that on me like I owe you something for your lack of ambition." The conversation had veered so far from what I'd intended that I felt like I was talking to a stranger wearing Lauren's face. I tried one more approach, suggesting we could maintain a long-distance relationship for 6 months while exploring whether she could transition to Dubai's creative sector, mentioning that the city had explosive growth in advertising and international agencies were constantly recruiting. She cut me off again. "I have a 3-week project launching in Denver next month. Complete brand overhaul for a major hotel chain. Their entire visual identity, website, promotional materials, everything. It's the biggest account our agency has landed in 2 years." I waited, sensing there was more coming and knowing I wasn't going to like it. "Ryan is co-creative director on the assignment. We're flying out together, we'll be working 16-hour days in their Denver office, and we're staying at the client's property to fully understand the brand experience we're creating." She leaned forward, and I saw the challenge in her eyes, the line she was drawing that she expected me to react to. "So here's what I need you to understand, Derek. My professional obligations include collaborating with Ryan on major projects. We have 3 years of creative shorthand from working together in college. We understand each other's processes, and clients specifically request both of us because our work is that good together. If you can't handle that, if you need me to request different creative partners because you're insecure about my ex-boyfriend, then you need to examine your own jealousy issues because I will not compromise my career trajectory for anyone's personal hang-ups." The ultimatum was so clear, so deliberately confrontational, that I felt something shift in my chest, not heartbreak exactly, but a sudden crystalline understanding of exactly where I ranked in her priorities. She just told me that 3 weeks in Denver with her ex-boyfriend was non-negotiable while any conversation about my career advancement was me trying to control her, that her professional relationship with Ryan mattered more than any accommodation for our relationship, that my concerns about their extended travel together were personal defects I needed to fix rather than reasonable boundaries worth discussing. I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd imagined building a future with, and I saw clearly for the first time that she'd already chosen, not me, not us, but whatever professional validation she derived from working alongside someone she'd once loved. "You're right," I said calmly, and I watched confusion flicker across her face because she'd expected an argument, expected anger or jealousy or desperate negotiation. We might not be compatible after all. The drive back to her apartment was silent except for the radio playing some forgettable pop song, and I could feel Lauren glancing at me periodically like she was trying to figure out what had just happened, why I wasn't fighting harder or demanding she reconsider or doing any of the emotional labor she'd expected from me. When I dropped her off, she hesitated before getting out of the car. "So that's it? You're just giving up?" I looked at her standing there with her hand on the door handle, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound sense of clarity about exactly who she'd shown herself to be. "I'm agreeing with your assessment. You need to prioritize your career and your working relationship with Ryan. I need to make my own career decisions without feeling like I'm sabotaging your professional growth. Those things aren't compatible." She stood there for another moment like she was waiting for me to crack, to reveal that this was some kind of bluff designed to make her apologize or compromise, but I just put the car in park and waited for her to leave. She finally got out, and I drove home to my Lincoln Park apartment feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't because I was devastated or second-guessing my decision. I was too busy running calculations in my head about timelines and logistics and the fastest possible path to Dubai. At 6:30 the next morning, I called my regional director from my kitchen while making coffee. "Derek, good to hear from you," Thomas said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice at the early Saturday call. "I hope you're calling with good news. I'm accepting the Dubai position. What's the fastest possible transition timeline?" There was a pause, then I heard him exhale like he'd been holding his breath for months. "I can have your offer letter and relocation package to you by Monday morning. Visa processing takes about 2 weeks if we expedite it. We could have you on the ground in Dubai within a month. Make it 3 weeks if possible. I want to be operational before the end of the quarter." I spent that entire weekend researching neighborhoods in Dubai Marina, reading expat forums about apartment hunting and cultural adjustment, watching YouTube videos about navigating the city's metro system and understanding local business customs. I created spreadsheets comparing housing costs and calculating my new salary against the tax-free income structure, and I felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in years, not just about the money or the prestige, but about the possibility of building something entirely mine without having to constantly negotiate my own worth. Monday morning, the offer letter arrived in my inbox with a relocation package that included temporary housing for 60 days, visa processing assistance, and a signing bonus that covered my entire moving costs plus another $10,000 for incidentals. I signed the documents during my lunch break and immediately contacted an international moving company to start cataloging what would ship versus what would sell. I gave notice to my landlord that same afternoon, explaining I was relocating internationally for work and invoking the career relocation clause in my lease that allowed early termination with 60 days notice and a modest fee. Over the next 12 days, I methodically dismantled my Chicago life with the same precision I applied to coordinating shipping logistics across continents. I hired a company to pack and ship my essential furniture and belongings, scheduled donation pickups for everything that wouldn't make sense to transport internationally, and sold my car to a colleague who'd been complaining about needing a reliable vehicle. I researched Dubai neighborhoods and signed a lease on a modern apartment in Jumeirah Beach residence with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Persian Gulf. The photos showed a space that looked nothing like my Chicago apartment, all clean lines and contemporary design that felt like stepping into an entirely different version of my life. I told my parents and my younger brother about the move, and while they were surprised by the speed of the decision, they'd met Lauren enough times to read between the lines when I explained we'd decided to go separate directions. My mom asked if I was running away from something, and I told her honestly that I was running towards something I should have chosen months ago. The strange part was maintaining normalcy with Lauren throughout all of this preparation. She texted me 3 days after our restaurant conversation asking if I was still upset, and I responded that I was fine, just busy with work projects. I took her to dinner twice that week at casual neighborhood places, listened to her talk about the upcoming Denver project with Ryan, responded to her messages with the same casual warmth I'd always shown. She seemed relieved that I wasn't making things dramatic or difficult, that I'd apparently accepted her professional boundaries and moved past my jealousy issues. She had absolutely no idea that I'd already signed a contract for a position 7,000 miles away, that movers were scheduled to pack my apartment in 9 days, that I'd booked a one-way business class ticket to Dubai International Airport. I wasn't hiding it out of spite or revenge. I just recognized that Lauren had made her choice clear at that Greek restaurant, and I was making mine with equal clarity. She told me that her work trips with Ryan were non-negotiable and that incompatible partners should separate. I was simply agreeing with her assessment and acting accordingly. 13 days after our conversation at the Greek restaurant, I was in my apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes, shipping crates, and luggage when I heard knocking at my door, insistent, rapid knocking that suggested whoever was on the other side wasn't planning to leave without answers. I opened it to find Lauren standing there in her work clothes, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, shock, and dawning horror as she took in the scene behind me. My living room completely dismantled, furniture wrapped in protective plastic, boxes labeled with international shipping codes, my life systematically packed away for transport across continents. "What the hell is happening here?" she said, stepping inside without invitation and spinning around to take in the full scope of the packing operation. "Are you moving?" I closed the door and leaned against it, watching her process what she was seeing. I accepted the Dubai position. "I leave in 5 days." Her mouth opened but no sound came out for several seconds, and I could see her brain struggling to reconcile this information with the casual dinners we'd shared over the past 2 weeks, the normal text conversations, my apparent acceptance of her professional boundaries. "You what? Dubai? Why didn't you tell me?" I accepted it the morning after our dinner conversation. "I've been preparing for the transition since then." She looked at me like I'd just announced I was joining a circus or moving to Mars, her face flushing red as anger replaced shock. "The morning after? You made a massive life decision the morning after one argument and didn't think to mention it? We've seen each other 4 times since then, Derek. 4 times, and you just casually forgot to mention you're moving to another continent." I stayed calm, keeping my voice level and matter-of-fact. "You made your position clear at dinner. Your work trips with Ryan are non-negotiable, and any concerns I have about that arrangement are personal defects I need to address. You told me that incompatible partners should separate rather than compromise. I'm agreeing with you and making my own career choice." Her expression shifted rapidly between emotions, anger, confusion, something that looked almost like panic, and she started pacing between the boxes like she could somehow reorganize them back into my staying. I didn't mean you should actually leave Chicago. I meant we needed to work through your trust issues, have conversations about boundaries, figure this out together like adults." "We did have that conversation. You established your boundaries very clearly. I'm respecting them completely." She stopped pacing and stared at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized I wasn't negotiating or seeking reconciliation, that this wasn't some dramatic gesture designed to make her apologize or change her mind. "This is insane. You're throwing away 3 years over me having to travel for work? That's what this is about? You're that jealous of Ryan?" I almost laughed at how thoroughly she'd missed the point, how she'd reframed her ultimatum as my jealousy rather than her choice to prioritize her ex-boyfriend over any possibility of mutual compromise. "I'm not jealous of Ryan. I'm choosing a career opportunity that you made clear would make me a bad partner. You need someone who won't question your professional travel schedule or feel uncomfortable with you spending weeks at a time with your ex-boyfriend. I need someone who views my career advancement as something worth discussing rather than evidence of me trying to control their life. Those needs aren't compatible." Lauren's face crumpled, and I watched her cycle into full desperation mode, her voice rising with each sentence. "We can work through this. We can set better boundaries, have better communication. I'll be more transparent about work travel, I'll call you every night when I'm away. We can see a couples therapist before you leave. I don't want to see a couples therapist. I want to move to Dubai and take a position I should have accepted 4 months ago. She was crying now, actual tears streaming down her face, and she moved toward me like she might grab my arms or force physical proximity to make her point. Derek, please. I know I was harsh at dinner. I know I made it seem like you didn't matter, but I was just scared about my career. I didn't mean any of it. We can make this work if you just give us a chance. I stepped back, maintaining distance, and I felt absolutely nothing watching her break down. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant observation that she'd only reconsidered our relationship's value when faced with losing her backup option. Lauren, you told me exactly how you felt. You said my concerns about your travel with Ryan were jealousy issues I needed to fix. You said you wouldn't compromise your career for anyone's personal hang-ups. I believe you meant every word. She wiped her face with her sleeve, mascara smearing across her cheek, and I saw her trying to calculate what approach might work, what combination of words might reverse a decision I'd already committed to completely. What if I turned down the Denver project? What if I requested different creative partners, showed you that you matter more than any work assignment? Then you'd resent me for making you sacrifice your career, and we'd have this same conversation in 6 months about something else. The problem isn't Denver or Ryan specifically. The problem is that you view my career advancement as sabotage while your career requires unlimited accommodation. Her face did something complicated, shifting from desperation to something harder, and when she spoke again her voice had changed to something sharp and accusing. You've been planning this the whole time. The dinners, the normal conversations, pretending everything was fine while you secretly packed up your entire life. That's cruel, Derek. That's genuinely cruel. I felt a flicker of anger then, the first real emotion I'd experienced since making my decision. What's cruel is telling your partner that their reasonable concerns about you traveling extensively with an ex-boyfriend are personal defects. What's cruel is framing career conversations as control tactics. What's cruel is making someone feel crazy for wanting basic transparency in a relationship. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, and I saw something shift in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that she'd misjudged how thoroughly I'd processed her restaurant ultimatum. We stood there in silence for what felt like several minutes, her crying quietly while I waited for her to leave so I could continue packing. Then she said something I wasn't expecting, her voice barely above a whisper. I slept with Ryan in Nashville. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my chest tighten, not with heartbreak exactly, but with the bitter satisfaction of having my instincts validated, of knowing I'd been right to trust the patterns I'd observed even as she'd accused me of jealousy and insecurity. Twice, she continued, the words tumbling out now like a confession she'd been holding for weeks. Once in his hotel room after we'd been drinking following a late brainstorming session, and once the next morning when I went to his room to talk about what happened. I've been carrying it since I got back, feeling guilty every time I saw you, every time you trusted me enough to not make this weird. I stared at her, processing this information with the same analytical detachment I applied to logistics problems at work, and I realized I felt absolutely nothing. No rage, no betrayal, just a cold confirmation that I'd been correct to leave. Get out of my apartment. Derek, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice in Nashville, and you made it again at that restaurant when you told me Ryan was non-negotiable. Now I'm making mine. Get out. She stood there for another moment, crying harder now, then she grabbed her purse and walked to the door. She turned back one final time, her face blotchy and devastated. I never meant for any of this to happen. I do love you. I know, I said, and I meant it. She probably did love me in whatever limited capacity she was capable of loving someone while prioritizing her ex-boyfriend and her career validation. But it's not enough, and it never was. The door closed behind her, and I stood there for approximately 30 seconds before I went back to packing my kitchen supplies, feeling lighter with every item I wrapped in newspaper and placed carefully in boxes labeled for international shipping. Lauren called me 83 times over the next 4 days. I know the exact number because my phone kept a log of every missed call, every desperate attempt to re-establish contact after I'd explicitly told her we were finished. The voicemail started apologetic and escalated to angry, then cycled back to desperate, then landed on bargaining. I listened to exactly one of them, heard her crying explanation about how Nashville was a mistake born of confusion and alcohol and unresolved feelings from their college relationship, how she recognized now that I was the person she actually wanted to build a future with, and I deleted the rest without playing them. The text messages were worse, paragraph-length novels about how she'd been scared of commitment, how seeing Ryan again had made her temporarily lose sight of what actually mattered, how she was willing to quit her job entirely and follow me to Dubai if that's what it took to prove her dedication to our relationship. I read them with the same detached interest I'd apply to reviewing a logistics proposal I had no intention of accepting, noting the escalation patterns and manipulation tactics without feeling any emotional pull toward responding. My close friend Marcus called on day 3 of my communication blackout to tell me I was being unnecessarily harsh, that everyone makes mistakes and Lauren clearly recognized the magnitude of hers, that I should at least hear her full explanation before making permanent decisions. I explained to Marcus that I'd already heard her full explanation. She delivered it at a Greek restaurant when she told me her professional obligations to travel with her ex-boyfriend were non-negotiable while my career advancement was evidence of controlling behavior. Everything that happened afterward was just confirmation of exactly who she'd shown herself to be. My younger brother called the next day with a similar message about forgiveness and second chances, and I told him that I wasn't punishing Lauren or seeking revenge. I was simply accepting the reality she'd created and moving forward with my own life accordingly. What bothered me more than Lauren's desperate attempts at contact was recognizing how many obvious warning signs I'd ignored over the past 7 months, how I'd rationalized her defensive reactions and communication blackouts and subtle ways of making me feel irrational for having basic relationship expectations. I dismissed my own instincts because I wanted to believe we were building something together, because I'd convinced myself that mature relationships required accepting your partner's professional obligations without question, because I'd been so focused on being the understanding boyfriend that I'd failed to notice I was the only person making compromises. The night before my departure, I finished packing my final suitcase and did a last walkthrough of my empty apartment, and I felt absolutely no nostalgia for the life I was leaving behind, just quiet satisfaction that I'd finally chosen myself over someone who'd consistently demonstrated I was negotiable while her ex-boyfriend was not. My flight to Dubai was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, departing from O'Hare International Airport, and I'd told exactly 4 people my specific travel details: my parents, my brother, and my regional director Thomas, who'd be meeting me at Dubai International Airport. I arrived at the airport 3 hours early because I've always been the type who'd rather wait at the gate than risk missing a flight, checked my 2 large suitcases and a container of belongings I'd need immediately upon arrival, and headed through security toward the international terminal. I was sitting in a coffee shop near my gate reviewing Dubai neighborhood maps on my laptop when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost declined it, assuming it was Lauren calling from yet another borrowed phone, but something made me answer. "Derek? Oh, thank God you picked up. It's Lauren." Her voice sounded ragged, desperate, like she'd been crying for hours. "I'm at O'Hare. I found out your flight information through Thomas's assistant. Please, I'm begging you, just give me 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes to talk face to face before you leave." I felt a surge of anger that she'd manipulated my travel details out of someone at my company, that she couldn't respect even this final boundary, that she'd driven to the airport to ambush me into a conversation I'd explicitly refused to have. "How did you get my flight information? That doesn't matter. What matters is that we need to talk before you leave for 6 months or a year or however long this assignment is. You owe me that much after 3 years together." I almost laughed at the audacity of her claiming I owed her anything, this woman who'd cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend and then demanded I accommodate her continued professional travel with him. "I don't owe you anything, Lauren. We had our final conversation when you confessed to Nashville. There's nothing left to discuss. Please, Derek. I'm at gate K7 right now. Your flight board's from K12. Just walk over here, give me 10 minutes, and if you still want to leave after that I'll never contact you again. I promise." I looked at my laptop screen showing the Dubai Marina apartment I'd be moving into, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Persian Gulf, the clean modern space that represented everything I'd been sacrificing while Lauren spent weeks traveling with Ryan. I'm not coming to K7. I'm already at my gate in the Qatar Airways lounge, and I'm not leaving it to have a conversation we've already had. Then I'll come to you. Just don't board that plane before I get there. Please. Lauren, listen to me very carefully. You made a choice in Nashville when you slept with Ryan. You made it again when you came back to Chicago and continued planning extended trips with him. You made it a third time at that restaurant when you told me that my concerns about your relationship with him were jealousy issues I needed to fix rather than reasonable boundaries worth respecting. I'm not angry about those choices anymore. I'm grateful for them because they freed me to finally choose myself. I was wrong. I was completely wrong about everything, and I've spent every day since you packed up your apartment realizing how badly I destroyed the best thing in my life. Please don't make a permanent decision based on temporary mistakes. I watched travelers walking past the lounge windows toward their gates, people beginning journeys to places I'd never been, and I felt absolutely certain about the path I'd chosen. They weren't temporary mistakes, Lauren. They were deliberate decisions that showed me exactly where I ranked in your priorities. You chose Ryan over our relationship, over any possibility of mutual compromise, over basic respect for reasonable boundaries. And now you're upset because you're facing the consequences of those choices. That's not my problem to solve. So that's it? 3 years together and you're just going to walk away without even trying to work through this. You walked away the moment you slept with Ryan in Nashville. You walked away again when you told me your professional relationship with him was more important than my legitimate concerns. I'm just the one who had the self-respect to stop chasing someone who'd already left. I could hear her crying on the other end, that desperate sobbing that once would have broken me, that would have sent me running to comfort her and apologize for causing her pain. Now it just sounded like someone mourning the loss of security rather than the loss of love. I hope you find what you're looking for in Dubai, she finally said, her voice thick with tears. I hope it gives you everything I couldn't. I hope it was worth throwing away 3 years. I ended the call without responding, blocked the number she'd called from, then pulled up my social media and blocked her on every platform I could think of. I opened Instagram one final time before blocking her there and posted a photo of my first-class boarding pass with the departure screen visible in the background showing Dubai destinations, and I typed a simple caption, "New city, new position, new chapter, VP of Middle East Operations." Then I blocked her account, turned off my phone completely, and sat in the lounge reading about Dubai's business districts and cultural customs until they called my boarding group. Walking down the jetway toward the plane, I felt absolutely no regret about the relationship I was leaving behind, only excitement about the future I'd finally chosen for myself. 3 weeks into my Dubai tenure, I was living in a reality that felt completely disconnected from the life I'd left behind in Chicago. I'd moved into my apartment in Jumeirah Beach residence with those floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light and offered unobstructed views of the Persian Gulf. I was coordinating shipping operations across 7 countries from the UAE to Pakistan to Kenya, and I was working alongside logistics professionals from 12 different nations, who brought perspectives and expertise I'd never encountered in my Chicago office. The work itself was exponentially more complex than anything I'd managed previously. Instead of tracking container shipments through American ports, I was now synchronizing operations across multiple time zones and navigating the regulatory frameworks of countries with vastly different customs procedures and business practices. My days started at 6 a.m. with calls to our Karachi office and often extended past 8 p.m. with evening meetings involving our European partners, and I loved every exhausting minute of it because I was finally operating at the level I'd been ready for months ago. I'd made exactly 0 attempts to contact Lauren since boarding that flight from O'Hare, and I'd kept her blocked on every platform to ensure she couldn't reach me through social media or messaging apps. But our mutual friends apparently didn't receive the memo about my communication blackout because my college roommate Jessica called me during my second week in Dubai with updates I hadn't requested. "Derek, I need to tell you something about Lauren because I think you should know what's happening back here," Jessica said, and I could hear the concern in her voice even through the international connection. She quit her job at the agency. Just walked into her boss's office last Monday and resigned effective immediately, no 2 weeks notice, nothing. And from what I'm hearing through our friend group, she's barely left her apartment in 2 weeks. Ashley says she's absolutely destroyed. I was sitting on my apartment balcony watching the sunset paint the Persian Gulf in shades of orange and pink, and I felt absolutely nothing hearing about Lauren's situation except a distant sense that consequences had arrived exactly as they should. I appreciate you letting me know, but I'm not responsible for how Lauren handles the results of her own choices. Derek, come on. I know she messed up badly, but don't you think you're being a little harsh? She made a mistake, she clearly regrets it, and now she's completely falling apart. I took a breath and tried to explain what Jessica apparently couldn't see from her position inside our social circle where Lauren had likely positioned herself as the victim of my cruelty. Jessica, Lauren didn't make a mistake. She made a deliberate decision to sleep with Ryan in Nashville, another deliberate decision to hide it from me while continuing to plan extended work trips with him, and a third deliberate decision to tell me that any concerns I had about their relationship were personal defects I needed to fix. When I responded by accepting a job offer I should have taken months earlier, she only reconsidered our relationship's value because she'd lost her backup option. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern of choices that showed me exactly who she is. But she obviously didn't understand how serious you were about leaving. Maybe if you'd been more direct about how hurt you were. I was direct. I told her at that restaurant that we might not be compatible. She chose to interpret that as me needing to work on my jealousy issues instead of recognizing it as the end of our relationship. That misinterpretation isn't my responsibility to manage. Jessica was quiet for a moment, and I heard her sigh in that way people do when they've decided you're being unreasonable but don't know how to convince you otherwise. I just think maybe you could call her. Let her know you don't hate her or something. She keeps asking our friends if you've mentioned her, if you seem sad about the breakup, and when we tell her you sound happy she gets even more upset. The image of Lauren desperately polling our mutual friends for information about my emotional state would have been pathetic if it wasn't so predictable. Of course, she was more devastated by my indifference than she would have been by my anger, because anger would have meant she still mattered enough to affect me. I don't hate her, but I'm also not going to provide her with emotional closure she hasn't earned. She's upset because she's facing consequences for the first time, not because she's genuinely sorry for how she treated me. I ended the call with Jessica shortly after that and went back to reviewing shipping manifests for our Mombasa office, and I didn't think about Lauren again until later that week when I received more unsolicited updates through our social circle's communication network. Apparently, the full story had emerged about why she'd quit her agency position so abruptly. Ryan had been in a committed relationship with another designer at their firm for 18 months, a woman named Sophie who worked in their branding division, and everyone at the agency except Lauren had apparently known about it. The Nashville encounter had been exactly what it looked like, a meaningless hookup with someone who'd never had any intention of rekindling their college relationship, someone who was probably drunk and available and willing to sleep with his ex-girlfriend without it meaning anything beyond physical convenience. When Sophie had found out about Nashville through office gossip, she'd confronted Ryan publicly in the middle of a team meeting, and the resulting scene had made Lauren's position at the agency completely untenable. Ryan had apologized to Sophie and blamed the entire incident on Lauren pursuing him despite knowing he was in a relationship, a claim that was apparently believable enough that several of their colleagues had started treating Lauren like she'd deliberately tried to break up a committed couple. The creative director had suggested Lauren take some time off to let the workplace tension settle, and she'd responded by quitting immediately rather than face the humiliation of being the office homewrecker. So Lauren had destroyed a 3-year relationship with someone who'd been willing to sacrifice significant career advancement to stay with her in Chicago, all for a drunken hookup with an ex-boyfriend who was already committed to someone else and who'd thrown her under the bus the moment his actual relationship was threatened. The poetic justice of it was almost too perfect. She'd prioritized Ryan over any possibility of compromise with me, and Ryan had valued his relationship with Sophie enough to publicly humiliate Lauren to protect it. I felt no satisfaction learning this information, no vindictive pleasure in her professional and personal collapse, just a reinforced certainty that I'd been correct to leave when I did. Lauren hadn't made a mistake, She'd made a calculated gamble that she could maintain me as her stable foundation while exploring possibilities with someone she found more exciting, and she'd lost that gamble because she'd fundamentally misunderstood that I had options and self-respect. The only tragedy was that I'd wasted 4 months declining the Dubai position because I'd believed we were building something together that mattered more than individual ambition, when the reality was that I'd been the only person in the relationship making that choice. 5 weeks after my move to Dubai, I'd been on several casual dates with expat professionals I'd met through work functions and social gatherings organized by my company's international team. There was Emma, a British marketing executive who worked for a luxury hotel chain and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Dubai's restaurant scene. Celine, a French urban planner involved in designing sustainable neighborhoods for the city's explosive growth, and Sophie, a Canadian corporate lawyer, specializing in international trade agreements, who made terrible puns about maritime law that somehow made me laugh anyway. None of these connections had developed into anything serious, and I wasn't pushing for that because I was genuinely enjoying the process of remembering that possibilities existed beyond my previous relationship, that I could have conversations with intelligent, accomplished women who paid for their own meals and didn't view my career success as a threat to their identity. The most surprising aspect of these dates wasn't the women themselves but my own reaction to them. I felt lighter and more present than I had in the final year with Lauren, genuinely engaged in conversations about urban development projects and international business strategy rather than mentally calculating whether I'd said something that might trigger a defensive reaction about my commitment level or trust issues. Emma and I had gone to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Burj Khalifa and spent 3 hours talking about the psychology of luxury branding and why people paid premium prices for experiences they could technically get cheaper elsewhere, and I'd left that dinner thinking about how refreshing it was to be with someone who contributed ideas rather than just waiting for her turn to talk about herself. Celine had taken me on a walking tour through Dubai's older neighborhoods where traditional architecture still existed among the modern developments, explaining the city's historical transformation from fishing village to global metropolis, and I'd appreciated being with someone whose passion for her work matched my own enthusiasm for logistics coordination. Sophie and I had bonded over being Canadians and Americans navigating Middle Eastern business culture, sharing stories about cultural misunderstandings and professional adjustments, and I'd enjoyed her self-deprecating humor about her own learning curve in a region so different from Toronto. My regional director Thomas pulled me aside after a particularly successful presentation to our executive leadership team about optimizing our East African shipping routes, and he closed his office door before speaking. "Derek, I'm going to share something with you that's confidential, but I want you to understand your trajectory here. Senior leadership has been watching your performance since you arrived, and you've exceeded every projection we had for your first quarter. The way you've handled the Karachi port delays and restructured our Kenyan distribution network, that's VP-level strategic thinking." I felt a surge of professional pride that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with knowing I was finally operating at my actual capability level. "We're creating a new position within the next 18 to 24 months, Vice President of Global Operations, overseeing our entire international shipping network. The executive team has already identified you as a primary candidate for that role. If you maintain your current performance trajectory, you'd be looking at VP by age 33, maybe 32 if we accelerate the timeline." The position Thomas was describing would have been completely impossible if I'd remained in Chicago, sacrificing career advancement to accommodate someone who viewed my professional opportunities as evidence that I didn't value our relationship enough. I would have been coordinating domestic shipping routes while watching younger colleagues with fewer qualifications get promoted past me because they had the geographic flexibility I'd voluntarily surrendered. "I appreciate your confidence in me," I told Thomas, and I meant it without the false modesty that usually accompanies professional compliments. "I'm exactly where I need to be." That evening, I was reviewing container manifests on my balcony when I received a message through LinkedIn from someone I didn't recognize. The profile belonged to Ashley, Lauren's roommate and closest friend, and the message was brief but loaded with implications. "Derek, I know you've blocked Lauren everywhere and you probably have good reasons, but she asked me to send you something and I promised I would. She's not expecting a response. She just wanted you to know. I hope Dubai gives you everything I couldn't." I hope it was worth throwing away 3 years. I stared at that message for a long time, reading the bitter accusation hidden in words that were technically wishing me well, and I felt something shift in my chest, not guilt or regret, but a final crystallization of understanding about exactly what Lauren had expected from our relationship and why it had been doomed from the moment she'd viewed my career ambitions as competing with her professional validation. The message assumed I'd thrown away 3 years, as if our relationship had been something valuable that I'd carelessly discarded rather than something she'd systematically destroyed through deliberate choices that showed me where I ranked in her priorities. She'd cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend, hidden that betrayal while planning additional extended trips with him, told me my reasonable concerns were jealousy issues I needed to fix, and then only reconsidered our relationship's value when she'd lost both her backup option and her professional standing. And somehow, in her version of events that she'd apparently shared with Ashley, I was the one who'd thrown everything away by refusing to accommodate her unlimited need for external validation at the expense of my own self-respect and career advancement. I typed a response to Ashley, then deleted it. Typed another version, deleted that too. Finally, I closed LinkedIn without responding because there was nothing to say that I hadn't already communicated through my actions. I'd chosen myself over someone who'd consistently demonstrated I was negotiable, and I wasn't going to apologize for that choice or provide Lauren with the closure she believed she deserved. The move to Dubai had already proven worthwhile, and not because of the 55% salary increase or the prestigious title or even the luxury apartment with Persian Gulf views, though those things were certainly nice. It was worthwhile because I'd finally prioritized myself over someone who'd refused basic compromise, because I'd stopped minimizing my own worth to accommodate someone who viewed my career advancement as a threat rather than an achievement worth celebrating together. I'd stopped dismissing obvious warning signs because the relationship was comfortable, stopped allowing someone to reframe reasonable boundaries as personal defects, stopped convincing myself that mature love meant accepting whatever treatment my partner decided was appropriate. Would I have preferred that Lauren hadn't cheated, that we could have navigated our career paths together with mutual support and honest communication about what we both needed? Absolutely. Would I have preferred discovering her character flaws before investing 3 years in a relationship that was fundamentally unbalanced? Of course. But that wasn't the reality she'd created, and I'd finally accepted exactly who she'd shown herself to be rather than who I'd wanted her to become. I'd spent 4 months declining a transformative career opportunity because I'd believed we were building something together that mattered more than individual ambition, and I'd finally recognized that I was the only person in our relationship making that sacrifice. Lauren had never considered following me to Dubai, never suggested exploring long-distance arrangements, never viewed my career advancement as something worth accommodating. She'd immediately framed any conversation about my opportunities as me trying to sabotage her professional growth, as if my success somehow diminished hers. And when I'd responded by accepting the position I should have taken months earlier, she'd been devastated not because she'd lost someone she loved, but because she'd lost someone who'd been willing to make himself smaller to accommodate her unlimited need for external validation without reciprocation. The final irony was that her desperate attempts to maintain both me and her professional relationship with Ryan had cost her everything. She'd lost the stable partner who'd valued her enough to sacrifice career advancement, lost her prestigious job when her office hookup became public humiliation, and discovered that the ex-boyfriend she'd prioritized over our relationship had never viewed her as anything more than a convenient encounter he'd immediately regretted. She'd gambled that she could have both security and excitement, and she'd lost both because she'd fundamentally misunderstood that real partnerships require mutual compromise rather than one person endlessly accommodating while the other takes whatever they want without consequence. 2 months after my arrival in Dubai, I was having dinner with Celine at a Mediterranean restaurant in Dubai Marina when she asked me something that made me pause mid-conversation. "You seem lighter than when I first met you. Like you've finally let go of something heavy." I thought about that observation, about the version of myself who'd sat in that Greek restaurant listening to Lauren tell me that my concerns about her traveling with Ryan were jealousy issues, about the person who'd spent months declining career opportunities because he'd believed sacrifice was the same as commitment. I was carrying someone else's opinion of my worth for a long time, I told her. I finally put it down. She smiled at that, and we moved on to discussing her latest urban planning project, but her observation stayed with me as I walked home along the marina promenade later that evening, watching the lights reflect off the water and feeling genuinely excited about my future in ways I hadn't experienced since my early 20s. Lauren had been right about one thing. Dubai had given me everything she couldn't. Not the salary or the title or the apartment, though those were tangible improvements. It had given me back my sense of self-worth that I'd been slowly surrendering in a relationship where my value was measured by how much I was willing to accommodate without reciprocation. It had reminded me that partnerships should enhance both people's lives rather than requiring one person to make themselves smaller so the other could feel bigger. It had shown me that walking away from someone who refuses basic respect isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. And it had taught me that the greatest act of self-love isn't dramatic gestures or revenge schemes, but simply choosing yourself when someone else has made it clear they never will.